Hello, welcome to this Lit in 5 video on language use in The Great Gatsby. This is the second of two videos on language. This particular part looks at language related to car imagery in relation to the Jazz Age and the presentation of women. If you're finding this content useful, please interact with the channel. Please add your likes, please add some comments, some recommendations, and if you're feeling generous, add some subscriptions, please. Thank you. Okay, so let's look at some car imagery here, particularly in relation to a moment at the end of chapter 3. Basically, this is to start exploring the idea of cars as a symbol of the Jazz Age, and this episode at chapter 3, I'm going to argue, should be seen as an allegory of the Jazz Age itself. So, in The Great Gatsby, when is a car not a car? When it's a symbol of the Jazz Age, of course. So what qualities do cars have that symbolise or represent the Jazz Age? Well, here are a few. You may have more. So, first of all, it obviously represents speed and a pace of life, an exhilarating sort of fast life lived by the hedonistic pleasure seekers of the Jazz Age. In chapter 4, we hear about Daisy's past, and we get told by Jordan Baker through Nick. They, Daisy and Tom, they moved with a fast crowd, all of them young and rich and wild. You also get the idea of cars symbolising wealth. So you can see from the picture here, this isn't any old kind of ramshackle car. Not everyone could afford them, but we're also into that idea of if you've got it, flaunt it, and that's certainly on show here. Look at the context video for ideas of conspicuous consumption again. The car also represents freedom and liberation. You can move around, you can explore. Also, we need to acknowledge that the car represents something dangerous and deadly. Not by itself, of course. Obviously, you put a drunk, jazz-fueled human being behind it, and then it becomes an instrument of death and destruction. So, the car symbolises danger and death if it's handled or driven without care, responsibility, and something severely lacking, as we've seen in people like Tom Buchanan. This is how a car can be more than just a car, symbolically representing the Jazz Age itself. So before we look at this moment from chapter 3, I want to raise a few ideas here on this screen which will set us up for that. First of all, I want to discuss how this chapter 3 moment will depict Fitzgerald's ambivalence towards the Jazz Age, his mixed feelings. If you've listened to the context video, which you should, you'll hear that we went through an essay called Echoes of the Jazz Age, which perfectly depicts and demonstrates Fitzgerald's ambivalence towards the Jazz Age. Also, you'll see from the context video and our discussion of chapter 3 now, we'll almost see chapter 3 as some kind of post-mortem of the Jazz Age. Now, even though The Great Gatsby is released in 1925 and obviously created and drafted before that, it's almost like in chapter 3 Fitzgerald sees the natural and sort of destructive end of this 9-10 year period of hedonistic excess and partying, and he dramatises this in this moment from chapter 3. So in a way, like a brilliant science fiction writer like Orwell or Margaret Atwood, this chapter 3 moment is almost prescient. It sees into the future and sort of predicts with eerie accuracy the inevitable end of the Jazz Age. Check out my context video for more on that, please. So what do we see as part of the Jazz Age in chapter 3 in this section coming up? Well, we see its drunkenness, its wild partying of hedonistic excess. We see it as quite comedic and funny as well. You should read this, and I defy you not to laugh at this. It's very comedic, very funny, much in the manner of slapstick comedy, which, as the talkies and the movies of this era are starting to demonstrate and be an extremely popular form of entertainment. So we have some slapstick comedy at first. Then we'll have lots of references towards music. When we look at the language, we'll see this raucous, noisy jazz music. All of this leads to a form of recklessness, which we then see expressed in irresponsible behaviour. So an irresponsibility leading to danger, destruction, and eventually death. This moment and other moments referring to driving catastrophes and near misses are almost like a warning, an advanced warning, a cautionary tale, where if people of the jazz age don't gain some responsibility and temper or abandon their recklessness, their drunken hedonistic excess, then it leads to a situation that we have with Myrtle Wilson later on. So these are near misses, these are cautionary tales, these are a warning about behaviours typical of jazz age people. If they don't mend their ways, a tragedy, a catastrophe will occur. Okay, so here's the moment from chapter 3 I'm referring to. Obviously you can pause this, or you can even open your novel, wow, and reread the episode for yourself. But I wanted to zoom us in on the particular language features here, which relate to this idea of cars and driving as a cautionary tale, as symbolic of this decadent and potentially, eventually, destructive jazz age. The first little cluster I want to point us towards is language to do with noise and sound. Now, okay, yes, this is kind of the closing of a party and it's very noisy. However, you'll see some references here which are sort of ambiguous, and as well as referring to car horns, can be referring to your horns of a jazz band, the trumpets and saxophones and everything else. So if you look very closely here, you'll see a harsh, discordant din. Jazz is famously discordant at times, chords that don't go together, deliberately clashing. You'll also see here the incessant groaning of the horns. Yes, they're car horns, but think of those in terms of jazz music as well. Similarly, down here, the caterwauling horns reached a crescendo, so an obvious musical term there as well. You also have up here a bizarre and tumultuous scene. So tumultuous, brilliant word, riotousness marked by disturbance and uproar. Yes, that can be the partygoers, of course it can be, in their drunken confusion and drunk driving, but absolutely hinting towards the idea of jazz music here, contributing to this sort of allegorical scene of all these ingredients of the jazz era, the roaring 20s, contributing to this recklessness, and on this occasion, a near miss in terms of death and catastrophe. Let's not neglect the comedic moments with this as well, linking to sort of jazz age cinema and slapstick comedy, of your Charlie Chaplins and your Harold Lloyds and all these kinds of people. This is a genuinely funny moment. So, did we run out of gas? Look! And everyone's pointing as to what's actually happened to the car. You may see some allegorical significance in this as well. I'll do my best to try and recreate drunken New York speech, but I wonder if they'll tell me where's the gasoline station. So the gasoline you may see as a sort of metaphorical reference for filling up. We'll see later how Tom was tanked up before he drives. Obviously that overlaps alcohol and gasoline as well. And then we have the comedic moment where someone explained to him that the wheel and car were no longer joined by any physical bond. Back out, put it in reverse. But the wheel's off. No harm in trying, he said. So, wonderful comedy. Comedy doesn't always translate well when you read it out loud off the page, but I think that really, really works, personally. So there is that sort of entertaining and fun and comedic aspect to it here. Remember on the previous slide we said there's an ambivalence about the jazz age? So there are some enjoyable, entertaining moments or aspects to it at first. However, despite that sort of comedic note, the vast majority of this allegorical moment does tip towards potential danger and foreshadows the eventual death of Myrtle Wilson. So we're exploring the jazz age in terms of the car, or the cars in terms of the jazz age. What we're building towards here is the analysis of Myrtle. She is run over by Gatsby's car. So in a way, allegorically, symbolically, you can see many of these facets or features of the jazz age as the things which contribute or cause the death of Myrtle Wilson. So let's start looking at in terms of the quotations. So this one here, blinded by the glare of the headlights. There's an obliviousness. There's a lack of responsibility. There's a lack of care. There's this kind of abandon because they're so blind and drunk with terms of hedonistic, alcoholic partying. Then you start to get hints of things like a poor driver. You start to get words linking or hinting at forthcoming deathliness. So ghostly pause, pale dangling individual, an apparition. This little bit of dialogue here as well, criticising the negligence here and the lack of responsibility, the recklessness we mentioned earlier. Well, if you're a poor driver, you oughtn't to try driving at night, as though night makes any difference, you know. And then we get that repeated a little bit later on here. You're lucky it was just a wheel, a bad driver, and not even trying. Okay, so there's that recklessness and irresponsibility and that carelessness. Speaking of shunning responsibility, there's Owl Eyes washing his hands of the whole matter. So again, irresponsibility, no one taking responsibility for their actions or their conduct here. And of course, we build to things like this, the amputated wheel. That's a strange sort of personification, but that adjective clearly does foreshadow a moment which we're going to look at shortly in terms of the grotesque description of the unfortunate and poor Myrtle Wilson and the state that the beautiful circus wagon and then eventually death car of Gatsby's car causes to Myrtle's body. All of this leads to the idea of the party being over, the jazz age ending, and all the fun has to stop at some stage. And obviously that coincides with the death of Myrtle Wilson. So down the bottom here, you see sudden emptiness and complete isolation. And then the final word of this during this moment is the farewell, as you can see on screen there. So this is why I'm interpreting this scene allegorically, and on the previous slide I mentioned a sort of prescience. This eerily sort of anticipates or predicts the natural and inevitable lifespan of this jazz age and the culture of the jazz age, and where Fitzgerald seems to suggest it inevitably and naturally ends in death, isolation, and a farewell. Very quickly, a few more references, a few more language moments referring to this car metaphor, even though we've done what I consider to be the main one, or one of the main ones. I guess the death of Myrtle coming up is very, very important too. So if you look here, we can see a little moment where Tom Buchanan is described by Nick. I think he'd tanked up a good deal before luncheon. This is in chapter 2. So there's drink fueling Tom and his pursuit of desire, his hedonistic pursuit of pleasure, never content, never satisfied, despite the immense wealth and the beautiful wife he possesses. Two examples of near misses here with cars as well, to go with the moment we've just seen in chapter 3. So this is Tom, yet again, on his honeymoon, with a further suggestion of adultery whilst on his honeymoon. How low can Tom Buchanan go? Very low, it seems. The girl who was with him in the car was a broken arm, so there's another broken body part in association with Tom Buchanan and the women in his life. But we have here Tom ran into a wagon on the Ventura Road one night and ripped a front wheel off his car. So we've just seen another wheel come off a car. So this is flirting with danger an accident and a catastrophe which is bound to happen, and eventually does, for poor Myrtle Wilson. We've also got another near miss over here in relation to our flapper from the novel, really, our best candidate for the flapper girl, Jordan Baker. So Nick and Jordan are chatting about driving a car. She passed so close to some workmen that our fender flicked a button on one man's coat. So we're getting towards the idea of irresponsibility here again, and lack of care. This danger that is waiting to happen from these careless, reckless people. Look at the complete lack of regard for others here as well. I am careful. No, you're not. Well, other people are, as though it's someone else's responsibility to be careful on the road. Not Jordan's, of course not. She's far too busy being a flapper of the 1920s. It's someone else's responsibility to be responsible. Oh, they'll keep out of my way, she insisted. Look at that sort of dangerous, reckless attitude there. The one exception to most of these characters is our narrator, Nick Carraway. But I am slow thinking and full of interior rules, a sense of morality here that most of his fellow characters in the novel don't seem to possess. Because he has, quote-unquote, rules, a sense of morality, that act as brakes on my desires. So many of the people he encounters and comes across do not have that. So our narrator is rather exempt from this group of people. His outsider status as a first-person narrator arguably makes him a really effective choice for describing, detailing, and for Fitzgerald, critiquing the excessive behaviours of these hedonists. But there's an interesting exception to the rule there, or exception to the other characters in Nick Carraway. We cannot leave a discussion of car language and car metaphors without looking at the description of Gatsby's car, of course. So it's interesting here in its first description in the novel. So we have Gatsby's gorgeous car, and it has a burst of melody from its three-noted horn. You know it's Gatsby. It's his signature. So look at that in terms of conspicuous consumption. Tie that back into the epigraph that opens the novel, about being the gold-hatted lover who bounces up and down to attract the attention of the woman who therefore cannot refuse him because he has gold and bounces up and down. This is all to win fair maiden, of course. These adjectives, you notice, go from gorgeous and pretty, and the idea of it being a spectacle, to see it, has seen it. Then the description becomes rather more negative, starting to hint at that journey from gorgeous, which is Nick's description here, to circus wagon, which is Tom Buchanan's dismissive label of it, to try and mock and score points over his rival Gatsby. And then we have through Nick what the local press refer to it as, which is the death car. So again, this is the car which kills Myrtle Wilson, as driven by Daisy, of course. So tying that into our symbolism and our symbolic reading of cars, these are the things which contribute towards Myrtle Wilson's death. And we see the words here: rich, bright, swollen, monstrous. So this is an aberration. This is something that is grotesque. What Fitzgerald could be hinting at here is these excesses of the Jazz Age are partly contributive towards Myrtle's death. And of course there it is, mirroring A Dozen Suns. It is to be seen noticeably by Daisy. Speaking of cars and death, we need to sort of segue now away from cars into the representation of women, but linking those two things as a sort of bridge between those two areas is, of course, Myrtle Wilson. So I have here a quote from some critical material here, Sarah Churchwell's book, Careless People, which is on The Great Gatsby, and she argues that, or identifies, a really relevant point here, which would be good for AO5 if you ever need to bring some of this into your analysis. Churchwell argues that socially aspirational characters are cut down by the privileged. Only the Buchanans as a couple survive. So, social climbers, Myrtle Wilson, GATSBY. They are cut down by the privileged. They die. They are not alive by the end of the novel. So see their fate sort of allegorically for daring to climb and belong to a social class, a social strata of the moneyed and the affluent, results in their death. The car is not directly linked to Gatsby's death, of course, but it certainly is in the case of Myrtle Wilson. So let's look at cars and Myrtle, and we'll use that as our way of shifting into the representation of women. So a couple of bonus extra observations before we get into the main description here. One is that the business was over. Remember, we've spoken about how the language of relationships, the lives these people lead, is saturated in the language of commerce, amounts, finance and money. Same here. Myrtle, as she dies, we are told how there's a mingling of her thick dark blood with the dust. We'll see in a moment how on her entry into the novel there is the dust of the garage owned by her husband, except for Myrtle. So that dust doesn't touch her as she descends the staircase, moving towards her lover, Tom Buchanan. Now it's almost like her true origins or her true identity has been restored to her, and for daring to climb or belong to another social class has resulted in her death, and the dust, which is a symbolic marker of her working class origins, she is absolutely intertwined with that now. However, the main area here I want to look at is this very powerful and deeply upsetting sort of description of Myrtle's body here, which recalls or links back to that amputated wheel that we saw in chapter 3. So amputated sort of, body parts and sort of decapitation or death of her body. So they saw that her left breast was swinging loose like a flap, and then there was no need to listen for the heart beneath. It's this particular bit I want to talk about here, which, coming at it from car imagery, but also linking to ideas of materialism we've mentioned elsewhere, is another contributive factor towards Myrtle's death. So, this symbolic description of mouth wide open and ripped at the corners, as though she had choked a little in giving up the tremendous vitality she had stored so long. I want to argue that these descriptions are related to ideas of consuming. Okay, so we had a lot of work on materialism earlier on, and how Myrtle embodies that idea and that wish to consume and to be materialistic as evidence that she belongs to a higher social class. Linked to that, and also partly to do with the Jazz Age, as symbolised by this death car, is Myrtle's materialism. The mouth was wide open, so there's a symbolic gesture or hint towards consuming. The mouth is the kind of area through which you consume. It is ripped at the corners, almost as though trying to consume too much. Excess, very important ideas in the novel, has led to this kind of mutilation and this tearing. And then, of course, there's another reference to feeding and consumption again, as though she had choked. So, in this awful moment in the novel, the description Fitzgerald uses is satirically, in a very bleak and dark way, hinting at the contributive factors of materialism, excess, whilst being a victim, the sort of receiving end of Jazz Age fast living in the form of the car, which is symbolic. Moving on to Fitzgerald's representation of women in his novel. So there are 4 areas in front of you here, all of which I've gone through in some detail in the context video. Please check that out. I'm going to quickly pick up on some of these, but then get more specific to how these ideas are represented, again through close language study, in The Great Gatsby. So out of the four here, it's 1, 2 and 4 that I'm interested in, that we'll be going through in detail. Number 3 has been dealt with in the context video, so check that out for some elaboration on that. However, the first one I want to look at here is the idea of women being insubstantial. Two things to note then in terms of insubstantial. One is the idea of women being sort of otherworldly or ethereal. We'll go into that in more detail in a moment. And at times, or maybe at first, it can be seen that women are presented in this intangible, insubstantial, ethereal way as some kind of otherworldly beauty, some kind of spirit or angel. Where they're so beautiful they don't appear to be of this earth. Think of the poem She Walks in Beauty. She walks in beauty in clouds of cloudless night. So someone or something adored and venerated to the level of some kind of otherworldly beauty or spirit as a compliment, not of this earth. However, whilst there might be moments that appear that way, I think the vast majority of this depiction of women as insubstantial, as intangible and ethereal, is a more critical and condemnatory approach to suggest that women have no substance and are otherworldly and not solid because of their materialism and their desire for wealth. They are empty, shallow, superficial. They are of no substance because they are primarily ruled by the desire for wealth, or men who can give them such wealth. So very, very misogynistic and very critical. Number 2, in the context video, we explored how Fitzgerald tends to represent and portray his female characters as sort of predators towards affluent men. They locate them, they lock them in their sights, and they don't stop until they obtain them and their wealth. They are driven by money, not love. I want to turn that slightly here in The Great Gatsby because I think Fitzgerald does. So I want to look at language presenting women as objects and trophies to be gained and acquired by men to flaunt, much in the manner of conspicuous consumption. We also spoke in the context video and the first language video about how women are prizes and trophies fought over and contested by competitive males who are more concerned with defeating their rival than they are with having woman X or woman Y, to the point where whoever the woman is, Daisy, Jordan, whoever, they become immaterial. It's more about defeating their male rival. Number 4, I want to zoom in on language depicting how women have a bewitching smile. So already with a witch, you can already make some links back to 1 in terms of this ethereal, floating and flying creature of the air with no substance, sometimes with supernatural overtones. We'll show you this in a moment. But the key thing here is to look at the idea of a bewitching smile or voice, and we'll look at that in terms of the sirens who are on screen now. These figures, according to Fitzgerald and his depiction of them, tends to result in the ruin and or doom of men. So you can definitely see how that sirens idea is incorporated here. So we'll look at some imagery exploring that, linking to the mythological creatures of the sirens who lure sailors towards them with their siren song and fool them into sailing irresponsibly. So they crash their boats into the rocks and then become fish food at the bottom of the ocean, purely for the amusement, and giggles of the sirens. Charming. So let's have our last little look at Myrtle Wilson. We've looked at her previously, of course, as a sort of tragic character whose fate is sealed from 2 factors, really. A victim of the Jazz Age. She's symbolically killed by an important symbol of it, and her own consumerist, materialistic needs and greed, if you like. I think a third factor contributing towards the fate of Myrtle Wilson comes from the idea of the movies and her social climbing and her desires to be more than the wife of a garage owner here. I've run this reading past other people who know The Great Gatsby, and they're not always convinced by my take here on Myrtle, but as ever, it's only an interpretation. See if you agree with this, partially agree with this, entirely dismiss it, but here we go. So I want to raise the idea of an aspiring movie star here with Myrtle. She clearly doesn't know anyone from Hollywood. In one of Gatsby's parties, we see a director leaning over a glamorous woman at the party, and he's her director. So the idea of social mobility through becoming a movie star, I think, is kind of in the background here with Myrtle. Let's try and prove that with some analysis here. So here's Myrtle's entrance to the novel, and then Nick notes he heard footsteps on a stairs, and in a moment a thickish figure of a woman blocked out the light from the office door. So maybe I've seen too many Oscar presentations or film awards whilst watching trash TV or something. But this entrance from Myrtle here seems to have something of the aspiring movie star about her. A grand entrance on a staircase. I know that's made slightly incongruous and comic in a way by she's walking down the stairs of an oily, dusty garage owned by her husband. But then you add things like this. Look, she carried her flesh sensuously. She smouldered. She smiled slowly. Then she wet her lips. For me, that's something of the screen siren of the Hollywood era. A movie star who is well aware of her sexuality and flaunts and uses that. I think this interpretation gains further weight, if you like, by some of the stuff over this side. So she has a moving she buys a moving picture magazine. So we noticed how the cinema is gaining prominence here, the talkies. So I think she's definitely influenced much in the way people are today about Celebrity X and the dress she wears. And did you see who was on this programme last night? Didn't she look amazing? There's the idea of celebrity culture here, to the point where, I don't know, when Kate Middleton wears a dress, people go online and it's sold out in seconds because they also want to look like Kate or whoever is the celebrity du jour. These things are at work with Myrtle Wilson, I think. Add to this the idea of the platform. Yes, that's referring to the train station, but I think there's also a sort of performative platform here as well. Stairs, platform, as though she's a stage or a star of the screen. Linked to this idea of the performative as well with social mobility. She changed her dress. She changed her, so Fitzgerald becomes deliberately more performative in his language now. She changed her costume and was now attired in. With the influence of the dress, her personality had also undergone a change, etc., etc., converted into impressive hauteur. So we're getting a change in character or personality in much the same way as you would put on a wizard's costume and you are Gandalf, or you would put on a shield and a body armour and you're Captain America or whoever. Myrtle has this idea of the performative, and she will dress accordingly to sort of gain that social mobility, to be more than the wife of a garage owner. Slight symbolic mention of levels here as well, when Myrtle and Tom are arranging to meet. Get on the next train. I want to see you. All right, I'll meet you by the newsstand on the lower level. So despite the dress and appearance of being more than working class, Fitzgerald undermines Myrtle's attempts at social mobility, all paid for by Tom's money, of course, with this adjective here, lower level. With that idea of transformation and the performative to gain social mobility, look at Myrtle's behaviour here when she's in the apartment. She becomes someone who's contemptuous of the working classes, the help, if you like. So she raises her eyebrow in disdain. Total facetiousness here. Oh, I just slip it on sometimes when I don't care what I look like. She changes costume far too many times to not care what she looks like. So all about image and veneer. There was a great word in The Great Gatsby which isn't related to women, which I'll flash up on screen now. Meretricious, which is to do with the idea of being attractive in a superficial / vulgar manner, but without real value. Okay, so we might use the phrase wannabe. Myrtle is faking it. She is pretending to be of a higher social class when she is absolutely of a lower level. And again, I think this is part of her tragic fate. Aspiring for more than she ought to be reaching for results in her death. Link back to that critic we mentioned earlier. So look at her haughtiness here. Another raise of her eyebrow. These people, you have to keep after them all the time. So there she is with a sense of superiority now, paid for or afforded to her by someone else's money. Regularly we get the verb swept as well, look. So she moves about in this haughty, regal manner. So she's swept into the kitchen, as though a dozen chefs were there. There probably isn't room for one chef in that kitchen. Whereas she's sweeping again, she's swept about the room. And there's that sense of superiority again. So there's our last little word on Myrtle, linking towards those ideas of socially ambitious, social mobility, but part of her fate is brought about by this materialism, by this consuming, as we saw with the detail on her deformed and mangled body in the previous slide. Okay, let's move to this idea of insubstantiality and the ethereal, otherworldly nature of women. I'm looking more specifically here at Daisy and also Jordan Baker at times in terms of this. So there's ethereal, a definition if you're a bit unsure on that previously. Just essentially means of the air, okay, almost like a spirit. So we can see here light, airy, also with the idea of heavenly or celestial. So at times it might appear complementary, but I think it's definitely linked to much more social critique and mocking satire. I've recreated here in this box that you can see now the words which helped me arrive at this idea, and I'm obviously going to go through and show you where they occur in a moment, but just imagine you've never read this novel and you saw these words in a poem or a play or whatever, and you were told, what does this suggest about character X? Just have a look at patterns here in these words. Hovering, or different versions of the tense, hovered, etc. Hovering, flutter, floated, hovering, put that twice, sorry, vanished, ripple, wind, whispered, impersonal eyes, disembodied and lost. You are looking at something belonging to another world, something not of this world, something otherworldly, intangible and ethereal. But this is absolutely, I'm going to argue, linked to criticism of superficial, materially minded women. I just want to equip you with this quote from chapter 7 as well, just to show this idea of intangibility, ethereal, insubstantial female characters. This is the moment when Tom is starting to be more controversial and show more conflict towards Gatsby with all these accusations and mentioning these rumours in front of him. So the chance of Daisy and Gatsby reuniting is becoming slimmer here. So Nick notes, it passed, and he began to talk excitedly to Daisy, denying everything, defending his name against accusations that had not been made. But with every word she was drawing further and further into herself. So he gave that up, and only the dead dream fought on as the afternoon slipped away, trying to touch what was no longer tangible. So that dream, or the pursuit of Daisy, or Daisy herself as this ethereal, elusive, otherworldly, intangible creature is starting to be reinforced here. But, as we'll show you now, it goes throughout the novel. So basically from here, just a whistle-stop tour of some quotations from throughout the novel, which will let you argue with close literary technique analysis these ideas of Fitzgerald presenting women as intangible. So first of all, Nick's first meeting of the women. We have here they were both in white, suggesting this kind of supernatural ghostliness. Their dresses were rippling and fluttering, as if they had just been blown back in after a short flight around the house. They don't fly, but it's lending to that idea of ghostly, supernatural depiction of the women here, something of no substance that can easily fly or take flight because they have no substance. The whip and snap of the curtains, this isn't their dresses, of course, but it lends to this idea of wind and being of the ether, ethereal. There you see wind, and then we have the women ballooned slowly to the floor. So again, no substance, no weight. Moving around here, there's the flutter of a dress and the crunch of leather boots. Look at the contrast. Tom is all about the earth and crunching the ground. Daisy is all about the air and the ether, something supernatural, otherworldly. Very, very critical here of women full stop, I guess, in the novel. This is Nick reflecting on his budding romance or love for Jordan Baker. I had no girl whose disembodied face floated. That is not a real flesh and blood person, is it? Someone who you were in love with. These kinds and types of women are disembodied. They are not real or substantial. And only a face floated. So you see in this flutter, floated, this kind of wind motif. Yet again, Miss Baker's lips fluttered. It's not real and tangible again. This is an interesting quote here. The white dresses are still there. Their impersonal eyes links beautifully to this idea of disembodied. There is nothing behind the eyes. No one is at home. Don't wear that. Don't express that in your essay like that. And this is because of the absence of all desire. So we have very moneyed figures, and there's almost no soul or life or reality within them because they have everything. Desire is absent. A little quote here, just showing again the flutter of slender muscles, already starting to hint, though, at this siren idea. So this is Jordan Baker for once. This idea is usually associated with Daisy, but it's also true of Jordan Baker, who's reading the Saturday Evening Post, and her words are murmurous and uninflected, running together in a soothing tune. So that lulling effect, putting a spell over the men who listen to them. More on that when we look at the sirens shortly. Let's move into women as objects, and again we'll show you the relevant quotations, all the metaphors, the similes, the symbolism to help your AO1/2. I did want to introduce an important critical quote here, which would be good for AO5/1. If the question asks for it, remember you must always be focused on the demands of each particular question. So Fetterley argues, ownership of the women is invoked as the index of power in The Great Gatsby. He who possesses Daisy Fay is the most powerful boy. So this is how we're getting into ideas of trophy wives or trophy girlfriends, if you're looking at adulterous relationships, or even there might be an argument for Myrtle Wilson as a wannabe trophy girlfriend. That's entirely up to you. So language presenting women as objects here to be won and contested and owned for sort of male status and pride. I just wanted to give you one more example here because there are plenty, but they're oh so important in the novel, of relationships being saturated in the language of money and quantity and finance and items, etc., etc. This is Jordan Baker in one of their flashbacks, which she relays to Nick. When I came opposite her house that morning, her white roadster was beside the curb, and she was sitting in it with a lieutenant, the young J. Gats, I had never seen before. They were so engrossed in each other that she didn't see me. There's that invisibility or sort of otherworldliness again reinforced until I was 5 feet away. So engrossed, a gross as a quantity is 144, but you can also talk in terms of gross profit, net profit. Absolutely another of those zingers of the language of money and amounts. tainting or poisoning or affecting what passes for love, in inverted commas, and relationships in The Great Gatsby. Similarly, seeing people as possessions and items and women as objects, it even starts from the youngest possible age. So this is Daisy's daughter. I remember reading the novel for the first time, and the notion that Daisy was a mother was absolutely astounding to me, because you don't learn that until... There's a hint of it in chapter 2, I think it is, or chapter 1, I can't remember. But when the daughter actually appears... Just, the idea of nurturing and raising a child just seems absolutely incongruous with Daisy. But here we go. I got dressed before luncheon, said the child, turning eagerly to Daisy. That's because your mother wanted to show you off. Trophies and objects again, you see. Her face bent into the single wrinkle of the small white neck. Ah, very cute. You dream, you absolute little dream. So I've emphasised dream. This is a real flesh and blood child, allegedly, apparently. I'm not quite sure anymore within the world of the Buchanans. But this flesh and blood person is sort of transmuted into something ethereal and of the ether again. A beautiful young fool is the quote that Daisy has, and that's the best a woman can aspire to be in this world, she says elsewhere in the novel. Moving around here, so I just kind of lumped all this together, really. These are from many different sources and many different places, so you can go mad here. This is where you can sort of go to town on all of these moments where language is used to present women as objects. So her voice, more on that in a moment, is full of money, the charm, the jingle, the song of it. High in a white palace, so high, that sort of preposition there, something to be gained, a trophy to be claimed and conquered as your own. The king's daughter, that might not sound like an idea of possession and an object, but I'd argue it is actually. If you win the king's daughter, then you are then part of the royal family by marriage. So it is a prize to be gained. Obviously the golden girl is. Look at the patterns here though. The golden girl, money, a grail, a precious cup or item, like silver idols, gleaming like silver, enchanted objects. There may be more hidden away in a dark corner of The Great Gatsby, but I think I've collated the main ones for you there. Even shiny, so bright things in it, which is Daisy's face, bright eyes, a bright passionate mouth, and then we have that sort of ethereal stuff again of she vanished into her rich house. So a very handy moment there, and lots of gathered quotations. You're welcome. And finally, in our representation of women, touching upon this idea of the bewitching siren voice, or occasionally a bewitching smile, an alluring smile that lures men in of all walks of life. So we mentioned that a lot on the context video as well, looking at Winter Dreams and Judy Jones. This, an embryonic version of The Great Gatsby, this absolutely comes across to The Great Gatsby itself. So let's have a look. Here's Nick under the effects of Daisy's voice. Her low, thrilling voice. It was the kind of voice that the ear follows, up and down, as if speech is an arrangement of notes that will never be played again. So there's that idea of the rarity of Daisy's words and her voice. You'll never get it again in that kind of formation, almost like improvised jazz, an arrangement of notes that will never be played, if you like, that way again. You may hear music again, or Daisy's voice again, but never in that arrangement. So a sort of jazz age take on the myth of the sirens. There's excitement in her voice that men who had cared for her found difficult to forget. So that idea of put a spell on you, under the influence, a bewitching effect, a whispered listen. I love these sort of sibilants of that, a whispered listen, almost trying to hypnotise you in that lyrical prose, as Fitzgerald has Nick describe it. And there's hovering again, just to reinforce that ethereal motif we established earlier. Yet again, something low in her voice. This is chapter 5. And Nick is at a distance from the two lovers who are entwined now, holding hands. So he can't hear what's being said because he's a little way back on the dock. But he notices Daisy sort of leaning in. Said something low in his ear. He turned towards her with a rush of emotion. It'd be fascinating to know what that was. It's almost like gaining the words of a spell that we can then cast, but we can't. I think that voice held him. Okay, so we're going to look at an idea of captivity here. Held him as prisoner. And then you get the lovely quote that voice was a deathless song. Well, deathless, I think the opposite is eventually true, isn't it? Okay, so look at this idea of captivity again. So the voice held him up here, and then we get their kiss. And it's not so much Daisy's voice here, but there's still a bewitching sound associated with Daisy. So Daisy's white face came up to his own. There's that white, that pale, sort of supernatural, ethereal creature again. When he kissed her and forever wed his unutterable visions to her perishable breath, his mind would never romp again like the mind of God. So there he is. He is captive now. He is prisoner under the spell of Daisy Faye. And again, it's not her voice, but listening for a moment longer to the tuning fork that had been struck upon a star. And then he kissed her. So there's his captivity with that idea of sound and this kind of floating beauty who will captivate him forever, which is where his obsessive quest is born, or originates, if you like. And finally, we get the exhilarating ripple of her voice was a wild tonic in the rain. So, hopefully that's illustrated those main ideas in terms of the representation of women for you. So, possible exam questions could be set on this. This could be a possible coursework focus for you depending on your NEA, your non-examined assessment. But surely that equips you with all the necessary you would need to explore these ideas in The Great Gatsby. Okay, so there's your second language video. Hopefully you can see the quality and the detail and the amount of work that has gone into helping you understand this and to more than give you a head start in terms of your writing and assessment on this brilliant, brilliant novel. Depending on the order you come at these, you may yet have stumbled across the form and structure video, the language part 1 video, and the context video. A desperate man is begging here for subscriptions and likes and comments. Please, possibly, maybe. Thank you.